The Marvel Cinematic Universe music is a disaster, not because it lacks excellent musical themes,
like the iconic Avengers theme or Captain America's first theme, which are epic and beautiful. But I have a question for you.
At this point in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the franchise already features dozens of heroes, villains, and iconic characters, each with their own musical theme in theory. How many of them can you hum right now? 3, 4? In a recent Instagram poll, 44% of respondents couldn't recall at least 3 themes. And we're talking about the fact that the people who follow me are not the general public. Most are people like me, people who thoroughly enjoy the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies and who probably listen to these musical themes as part of our daily life. For the general public, this percentage is likely even lower. Why does this happen? Don't worry, I have the answer, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I need to clarify a couple of things about this video. First, regarding copyright issues. I can't use large parts of these musical themes. So, I'm going to focus on using short segments, and I'll run these audios through some pitch change process or filter to avoid any problems. Even so, they may need to mute video parts in the future because record labels are essentially evil. If you see any muted snippets in the future, just skip ahead a bit. We cross our fingers hoping everything goes well, and having said that, let's get started. The big problem with the Marvel Cinematic Universe is music, and what makes the majority of these characters' musical themes barely memorable lies in the way the franchise uses each character's individual musical themes. To comprehend Marvel's misstep, we must first grasp the concept of a character's central theme. It's a musical theme, usually instrumental, that has the function of conveying certain characteristics of the character through music. In other words, if the character is heroic and powerful, then the composer has to manage to represent this, but through music. But here we start to see a first problem that Marvel Cinematic Universe composers face. And it's the fact that each of these characters we see in this scene is basically heroic and powerful. Which tells us that to properly represent each of these characters, the composers have to be more specific than that. But we'll get back to this point a little later. First, we need to mention how do we know what a character's central theme is. The first thing to know is that the central theme of each character is found in the original score of the movie, which is different from the soundtrack. The original score is the instrumental background music composed specifically for the movie, whereas the soundtrack is usually composed of songs by famous bands and singers. Whether they are existing songs or songs that have been composed for the movie, a great example of a soundtrack is in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Several comments on my stories noted that they recalled the main theme from Guardians of the Galaxy. We would have to ask if they are referring to the real theme of the Guardians or a song from the soundtrack. This is the theme of the Guardians. These are songs from the Guardians soundtrack, but they are not the theme. The original soundtrack includes the theme for each character, but which track contains each character's theme? Sometimes composers make it simple, like with the Iron Man movie where the theme is called Iron Man. But there are soundtracks like Black Panther's, where none of the tracks are named that way. Really, the best thing is to watch a movie and when a character comes out, pay attention to what is playing in the background. These central themes can also be called lead motifs. But the central difference is that a lead motif refers only to a specific and representative section and not to the entire theme. Or if a lead motif is a melodic phrase, a musical fragment, not the 3 or 4 minutes of the entire track. Musical themes and leitmotifs are great for presenting ideas that may not be seen on screen. This is clearly illustrated in the Infinity War scene. I know a place. This exemplifies how a musical theme can evoke a character or place without visually showing it. The drums evoke Wakanda and Black Panther in this case. Before we see the scene change, for this to work well, there has to be musical continuity. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has a serious problem with musical continuity, and after this video, you won't stop noticing it. This was the musical theme of Iron Man in his first movie, but in Iron Man 2, it was this. It's curious that it sounds like the first theme due to the accents and electric guitar, but it's actually a different one. Rewind the video a bit to hear it. Iron Man next appeared in Avengers without his previous musical themes, followed by Iron Man 3. Yes, we have a third Iron Man theme. Did you guess it? This is basically the musical equivalent of having 3 different actors playing Tony Stark throughout his 3 movies. But what do you think? This happens to other characters too. Captain America's March is among the most iconic musical themes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The movies Winter Soldier and Civil War each have an additional central theme. Thor had it worse because he had 4 different musical themes throughout his movies, which makes it difficult for viewers to remember a specific musical theme from any of these characters, since between these 3 characters they have 10 different themes. Had you noticed? And above all, you're probably wondering, why does this happen? Sometimes this change has to do with the fact that the movies have different directors. So each one brings with them a new approach and a new creative team behind. But for example, Jon Favreau was the director of both Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2, and yet the musical theme changed. The worst part is that these 2 themes are very similar in instrumentation and what they convey, yet they are different. I don't understand the reason for the change. Another case is found in the movies of Winter Soldier and Civil War, as both are directed by the Russo brothers, but the musical themes change. This suggests that even if the movie's composer changed, the director may ultimately decide to retain the previous composer's musical theme. It's important to note that musical changes sometimes occur because the story itself demands it. For example, the Thor we see in his first movie has a musical theme with more solemn characteristics, and that gives you a sense of royalty. However, it would be odd to hear the same musical theme in movies like Thor Ragnarok, where the character had already taken a completely different path. The musical theme changes in the Winter Soldier movie as well, which is logical. Even though Captain America's March is beautiful and iconic, the tone of Winter Soldier changes completely, because it's a darker spy film, which sounds like that. However, even though the tone of a movie changes, what the composers were able to do is adapt the first musical theme to a new story. In Winter Soldier, composer Henry Jackman adapted Alan Silvestri's theme from the first Captain America movie, reharmonizing it to create a new aesthetic that would fit the Winter Soldier movie. Danny Elfman mentioned in an interview that he had to incorporate a common element into Joss Whedon's Justice League movie. I hate you, Joss Whedon, I hate you. John Williams' Superman theme, Hans Zimmer's Wonder Woman and Batman themes from 1989. Another example of this exists in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Did you notice that the beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as Spider-Man theme refers to the theme of the 1967 cartoon? This is the theme of the cartoon. This is Tom Holland's Spider-Man theme. Basically, what they're doing is taking the first 3 notes from the cartoon, playing them slower and giving them a different ending. This typically occurs when a composer like Michael Giacchino desires to create a distinct musical theme. The story may require it, but it is done in a way that pays homage and considers the character's musical history. This is an excellent method to maintain musical continuity in a franchise, taking into account what came before, something that the Marvel Cinematic Universe often forgets, and I think at least at the beginning of the franchise. This was because they did not consider music as part of this shared universe experience, and this is understandable. Nowadays, everyone wants to make their own shared cinematic universe. But in 2008, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was treading new ground, so perhaps it didn't occur to anyone. That musical continuity would also be important. It would have been very cool to hear the Iron Man 1 theme in the Avengers film, which would have sounded like this. In my view, it wasn't until the 2012 Avengers movie that they realized that music should also be part of the plans for this shared universe. Similar to the cast visuals and narrative tone, this created a second issue. The Avengers musical theme is the Marvel Cinematic Universe's most iconic. However, it unintentionally caused an issue, which is the main theme of Iron Man's first movie. After the Avengers film, they changed it in Iron Man 3. It sounds good, but has lost some personality, resembling the Avengers theme. The same happens with Thor. This was his first theme. Did they change Loki's theme to this one for his movie Thor: The Dark World, which released after the Avengers? Again, I feel like they convey similar emotions. In fact, listen to this mix I made with snippets from various Marvel Cinematic Universe themes, and you can notice how each one feels like part of the same theme. This could be due to the decision to unify the Marvel Cinematic Universe's musical tone after the Avengers, which makes sense in terms of continuity and cohesion. But unfortunately, it also made the themes lose some originality and personality. This is one reason it's difficult for people to remember more than 2-3 musical themes from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Despite there being dozens of different heroes in it, all the composers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe have a couple of problems. The first is that apparently they currently have to compose their themes in such a way that they don't feel too far removed from the central musical tone of the franchise. In other words, each of the musical themes has to feel like part of a single universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The second issue relates to something mentioned at the start of the video. Let's remember that the composer's role is to represent the characteristics of a character through music. But here all these characters are powerful and heroic. How do you differentiate them? The answer is in finding what makes each of these characters special and unique. What sets them apart from other Marvel Cinematic Universe heroes? Some composers have creatively expressed this in their music. One way to achieve this is for the music to tell us about the culture or place of origin of a certain hero. For example, in the case of Shang-Chi, melodies and instruments that we culturally associate with China were used. A similar situation occurs with Black Panther.
In fact, in this particular case, the composer Ludwig Göransson studied African music in depth to be able to identify some rhythmic patterns and instruments that are used.
That's why the theme of Black Panther has rhythms that we rarely hear in Western music. Interestingly, he also incorporated various rhythms and more Western instruments. Killmonger's American upbringing makes narrative sense for his character. Ludwig is a musical genius.
I consider it one of the best scores in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, even winning the Oscar for Best Original Score.
Another character who also has a very interesting theme is Ant-Man. I would have attempted to musically portray his powers by conveying something that shifts from large to small and back again. Composer Christopher Beck experimented with low and high sounds in his music. Wanted to reflect the sound of heist and spy movies like Mission Impossible. So the result was this. For Doctor Strange. On the other hand, Michael Giacchino uses a harpsichord, which would be like an ancestor of the piano, to give this exotic and mystical sound to his character. When Doctor Strange returns in Thor Ragnarok, his musical theme is absent. Although a missed opportunity, the harpsichord is still present. All in all, what represented the character in this case was not his musical theme, but a certain sound. A similar case is seen in Guardians of the Galaxy. Even though they do have a musical theme, when they are introduced in Infinity War, it is done through a type of 70s retro song. It's curious that in the same movie, they introduce Black Panther with his musical theme, but not the Guardians. They conclude that their most iconic musical element lies in their soundtrack rather than their theme. I really like this example because on this occasion, the soundtrack works as a kind of leitmotif. I don't know how it happened to you, but I remember when I went to the cinema to see Infinity War. The whole room got very excited with this song. We anticipated the Guardians of the Galaxy's arrival. This confirms that the Marvel Cinematic Universe boasts exceptional compositions and composers. But the audience has a hard time remembering the musical themes of this franchise because they have made many major mistakes in terms of musical continuity and use of leitmotifs. For example, at first it didn't seem like there was a long-term construction which made us have different themes for each character in each movie. And later on, they chose to unify the sound, which made many of the compositions look alike. The worst part is that even though they unified the sound to make it feel coherent with the universe, which caused many themes to look alike, even so, they missed many opportunities to present the leitmotifs they had already established in other movies. As in movies like Infinity War or Endgame, that is, ensemble movies where we could hear references to the musical themes of each character. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Kevin Feige, not being very musical, doesn't notice these things. I don't know for sure. Maybe it's time for Marvel to hire a composer to oversee all the musical continuity of their franchise. Because, at the end of the day, it's not that the Marvel Cinematic Universe doesn't have good themes or good composers, they just haven't known what to do with them. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our content. We take geek culture very seriously here. I've included other videos you may enjoy. That's all for today. I'm Go. Keep looking beyond the obvious.